I bid welcome to all Adam's children to this week's sermon, which is a continuation of the drinks of the Fallout series. This video will focus on a particular subset of beverages that goes by many names, like Liquid Courage or Firewater, just to name a few. So crank up the rads and take the edge off as we look at some select beverages of Fallout. Moonshine is found throughout several Fallout games, being first seen in the Point Lookout DLC of Fallout 3. Found in a large ceramic jug all over Point Lookout, it is commonly found on the Swamp Folk and can be crafted by supplying the ingredients to Marguerite so that she can use her still to make the moonshine. The recipe requires yeast, punga fruit, either wild or refined, and lastly, fission batteries, which is kind of curious. I initially assumed the fission batteries were only a part of the recipe in order to power the still by producing the necessary heat. Marguerite makes it plainly clear though that life out in the swamp is so bad that consuming the fluid in fission batteries is considered a special treat. Indeed, this fluid is the secret ingredient, which honestly there is a whole video that could be dedicated to the paradox of a fission battery, but it is highly likely that fluid in any tech that uses fission would be highly radioactive, but the moonshine itself is not radioactive at all. How the swamp folk not only survive with fission battery laced moonshine, but are tanky as crap is a question only Adam himself can answer. It is shown in an old fashioned jug, and most of the other examples of moonshine are also shown in this kind of jug, which has come to symbolize moonshine since the heydays of moonshine during the Prohibition era. Moonshine has greater buffs and debuffs to the player when compared to just standard alcoholic beverages that can be found. Maybe owing to the increased alcohol content, but the addiction chance is the same as all other Fallout 3 alcoholic beverages, sitting at 10%. It will increase charisma and strength by 2 while decreasing intelligence by 1, and unfortunately cannot be stacked. Whether you opt for a wild punga fruit or refined punga fruit doesn't have an effect on the end product, and looks like it is the source of sugar needed for the fermentation process. While moonshine is usually used as a catch-all for high-proof alcohol that has been distilled without a distilled spirits permit, such permits no longer exist because the government got blown to tiny little bits. So in the case of the post-apocalypse, moonshine is likely just a catch-all term for home-brewed, high-proof alcohol. Although it could be referring to an unaged whiskey, which is how most people regard moonshine, since the process and ingredients are very similar or often exactly the same in our world. There is no grain that is used in this recipe, so it is more likely it is a schnapps or a fruit brandy, since the punga fruit are the primary ingredient. New Vegas also has moonshine in the same form as Fallout 3 with a few small changes. The player can now craft the moonshine rather than relying on someone else, and the recipe itself has also changed. Still requiring a fission battery, maize, yeast, and mute fruit, the effects are the same as in Fallout 3 with a 25 increase to dehydration in survival mode. It can be crafted at a campfire or hot plate, which I've never made moonshine, but that sounds a little suspect, and requires a survival skill of 75, as well as getting the recipe from New Vegas's favorite functional alcoholic, Cass. It can be found in a few locations like the Nipton Hall or Prospector Saloon in Goodsprings, although it is not a common item to find. Given the recipe, this could be a special kind of whiskey since we know that Cass has an affinity for whiskey, or very possibly a fruit liquor since we have the addition of the mute fruit. The vague nature of the crafting and the ingredients list can often make it hard to know what the end product is supposed to be. The most happening place in Diamond City is the Dugout Inn, which is a bar and motel run by two brothers who seem to hail from Eastern Europe. Yefim and Vadim Bobrov are busy serving clients, running their business, chatting with customers, and breaking up fights, and still somehow find time to distill their special kind of moonshine. The drink has some pretty good status effects, increasing max hit points by 25 HP, strength by 1, and charisma by 1, just lowering intelligence by 1, all for 300 seconds. The addiction chance is also fairly high at 25%, and should one lapse into withdrawal, you will suffer a penalty to charisma and agility. In survival mode, don't think that this will help quench thirst, as this potent brew will actually increase thirst by 15%. The bonus to charisma and strength is exactly like the effects of vodka that can be found in Fallout 4, which could mean that the Bobrov's Moonshine is probably vodka or something close to it. This would totally make sense since the brothers seem to either be from Eastern Europe or their immediate ancestors were from there, because they have very distinct accents, and vodka is obviously a very popular choice in that part of the world. The in-game model reuses the Rooster's Rum bottle, which is a fictional brand of rum that was produced in the pre-war, just with a large label taped over the front reading Bobrov's Best Moonshine. It is safe to say that the drink is quite popular throughout the Commonwealth, as it can be found in over a dozen locations scattered about. Locations such as Grey Garden, Sanctuary, and Libertalia all have at least one bottle of Bobrov's kicking around. So it seems like it is a drink that crosses all sorts of boundaries and adversarial relationships. Another moonshine can be crafted by the player in Fallout 76, known as the Cranberry Moonshine. Being made with cranberries and snaptail reed, the player will make fermentable cranberry moonshine, which has not undergone fermentation and distillation yet. So most of the beneficial effects do not apply. Once the player puts it through the fermentation process, however, it gets a nice label with some cranberries on the moonshine jug, increasing charisma and strength by 1, max HP by 25, while lowering intelligence by 1, and has a 15% addiction chance. Addiction will lower agility and charisma each by 1, and given how easily the ingredients can be obtained, this can be a good option for some easy stat boosts. So without really any other evidence, we may assume moonshine in the Fallout series is unaged whiskey, unless there is some evidence that contradicts that. So without any other evidence, we may assume for the cranberry moonshine that the snaptail reed ingredient constitutes the mash, and the cranberries are a later addition, which would make this more of a fruit liquor. Although not referred to as moonshine in-game, I'm including the so-called mountain honey with all the other moonshines, as it is in the same container as the cranberry moonshine with its own unique label that has a dead bee on the front. It has the same effects as the cranberry moonshine, granting 1 to strength, 1 to charisma, and 25 to max HP while decreasing intelligence. The main difference other than the label are the ingredients, which requires water, snaptail reed, and honey instead of cranberries. This would probably make mountain honey a honey liquor, and the only reason to opt for this over the cranberry moonshine would be ingredient availability and whether or not you have the recipe, since they are otherwise exactly the same. Fallout 76 lets us use the previously mentioned Rooster's Rum in its full form, increasing strength like normal, but also agility by 1 and decreasing intelligence by 1. With only a 5% chance of alcohol addiction, which is rather low, this can be found in places like the Sunnytop ski lanes, but can also be crafted like so many other Fallout 76 consumables. It is made with water, snaptail reed, and sugar, and then has to be fermented to be actual rum. It is interesting that this mirrors the cranberry moonshine, where sugar is substituted for cranberries. But most interesting of all is that rum is primarily made from sugarcane juice. Crystallizing sugar from sugar cane will make molasses, which is what is then mixed with yeast and fermented, which is what is then mixed in water with yeast and fermented. Rum can be colorless, in which case it has been aged from a few months to a year in stainless steel vats, or darker in color, which is aged longer and usually in oak barrels. The aging process alters the flavor, and after the aging process, the taste can be altered even further by mixing with other kinds of rum or introducing various spices. So maybe this recipe uses just the sugar, and after fermentation, the snaptail reed is used to flavor the rum after the aging process, rather than being incorporated into some sort of mash, which rum does not use. Fallout 2 introduces a consumable that is also found in Fallout Tactics, but should really make a comeback in more recent Fallout games, the Roentgen Rum. It provides no upsides to drinking it, since the only effects are -2 to perception and +2 rads with a 20% addiction chance. The radiation is not from the Great War, however. It is an intentional addition to the drink. A few of you no doubt picked up this hint in the name Roentgen, since this is the last name of a famous German scientist who conducted important research in the realm of X-rays and ionizing radiation, eventually becoming a unit of measurement for radiation, corresponding to the charge transmitted by a mass of air. It can only be found in 2 places in Fallout 2, the Den and Gecko, where it has to be stolen, and in the case of Fallout Tactics, it is only found in 1 place. The bottle itself is rather indistinct, looking like an older bottle design, complete with a large label, where the only things that can be made out are Roentgen and 3 large X's at the bottom. Those X's correspond to the number of times that the liquid has been put through the distillation process, and was a practice that started with moonshiners in order to easily let people know that the alcohol was strong. Although the game model looks pretty standard, the in-game description tells us that it glows in the dark, which sounds awfully familiar. I can't quite place it, but I'm pretty sure later games use that similar idea. Maybe it'll come back to me later. Fallout New Vegas gives us good old-fashioned absinthe. No added radioactive ingredients or questionable moonshine here. Likely put into a repurposed bottle, it has a handmade but honestly much better than average label, and absinthe's normal green color. This uncommon alcohol is usually found in the kitchens or cocktail lounges of the various casinos on the Strip, and is unusual among the alcoholic drinks because it increases perception by 1. Like with most alcoholic drinks, charisma is increased by 1, and in survival, it will increase dehydration by 20, with only a 10% chance of alcohol addiction. Depending on the player's survival skill, absinthe can increase perception and charisma up to 3 for 4 minutes, while increasing dehydration by 60. But the intelligence debuff also increases to -3. Absinthe is quite alcoholic and is made with a variety of herbs and other ingredients that give it the unique coloring and taste. These ingredients include wormwood, green anise, and fennel, and there isn't anything here that would make a buff to perception make any sense. Plain old bourbon is found in Fallout 4, where it is shown in a nice bottle with the name Premium Appalachia, and where it states that it was aged 9 years on the bottle. Rather than the standard strength and charisma boost, it increases strength and endurance, although the intelligence penalty is the same. The addiction chance is 20%, and it is commonly found in the Commonwealth. Fallout 76 has bourbon as well, and the name is very appropriate given the setting of Fallout 76. It is the same as Fallout 4, with the only difference being a reduced addiction chance at only 5%, and the player once again is able to craft bourbon themselves. Requiring water, grain, and corn, this will get you a fermentable form that does not grant the stat boosting effects and also has a 9% disease chance. But once it is fermented, then it is the good old bourbon. The ingredients are on point with what makes a bourbon, where there is a requirement of at least 51% corn in the mash to give bourbon its distinct taste and attributes. The beverage, simply known as a whiskey, is first seen in Fallout 3 with the Old Royal brand that can be found all over the capital Wasteland. It has the standard strength and charisma boost with an intelligence debuff and a 10% addiction chance. It actually glows a bit in low light, although it is nothing approaching Nuka-Cola Quantum and appears to be an in-game effect more than anything, since it is not radioactive and there is no other note of the whiskey being able to glow. Since it can be found all over the place, it is an easy pickup. And if you are needing to boost your carry capacity for a bit, just pop a quick whiskey and get to your in-game home to store some items. New Vegas has the same whiskey from Fallout 3 and has all the same effects and stats as in Fallout 3. If the player has the Whiskey Rose perk from completing the Cask Companion quest, then consuming whiskey will increase damage threshold by 2 to 6 depending on the survival skill of the player, and whiskey will increase dehydration by 25% in hardcore mode. While the Whiskey Rose perk will affect all alcohol, eliminating the intelligence debuff and addiction chance, the damage threshold increase is special to whiskey since it is Cass's drink of choice. Whiskey is still very common in the Mojave and found just as easily as in Fallout 3. Fallout 4 has its own version of whiskey that is not the Old Royal, but rather an Irish whiskey, since Fallout 4 leans hard into the Irish influence with its Boston-centered setting. Created pre-war by Ishkabaha, which is Old Irish for water of life, and is the root for the modern English word, whiskey. It is an old brand, apparently operating since the 18th century if the label is to be believed, and is found commonly throughout the Commonwealth. It causes an increase of strength of 2, and normal reduction of intelligence by 1, and a 20% alcohol addiction chance, which is on the higher end of all options in Fallout 4. Fallout 76 has the same whiskey from Fallout 4 with the same effects, except the addiction chance goes down to 5%, which is quite drastic. It is commonly found in Appalachia and can be crafted where it has the same exact recipe as bourbon, which is a little problematic, but may be explained by having less corn in the mash, since below 51% is the threshold that is used to define bourbon by modern brewing standards. Dixon's whiskey from Fallout New Vegas can only be sold by Dixon in Freeside, and has some serious issues. Although it looks just like a normal whiskey, it is apparently low quality, or perhaps cut with something cheaper and more dangerous. It will increase strength by 1, but has no charisma buff and decreases intelligence by 2. This means that with a maxed out survival skill, that the intelligence debuff can be as low as -6, which in most applications would be terribly inconvenient, but can be useful if the player needs to pass a low intelligence check, like when trying to convince Arcade Gannon to join them as a companion. That said, the addiction chance is a whopping 50%, meaning that you are a coin flip every time you down one of these as to whether or not you get addicted. Cass, the one human in the Mojave whose body isn't 70% water but 70% whiskey, will mention Dixon's whiskey and let the player know in no uncertain terms her distaste for the drink. You know you messed up when the local alcoholic won't even touch your stuff. Firecracker whiskey was a cut beverage in Fallout 76 that would have been made using water, corn, and firecracker berries, which by definition wouldn't really make it a whiskey, but who knows, maybe it would have been aged similar to whiskey. We don't know a ton about this because it has never been implemented in game, but what we do know is rather strange. For instance, one effect would be so-called self-immolation, where melee attacks on an enemy would also damage you, the player, and the fermented version would cause attacks to also do fire damage. I don't know what circumstances you want to take damage every time you deal damage, unless maybe you're running a bloodied build, but even then, that's pretty strange. It was supposed to be represented as a drinking glass, and there were even other variants. The Firecracker Whiskey Manhattan would be a brown liquid in a mason jar, and although we don't know the ingredients, it would have had the effect of causing melee attacks to do fire damage as well. The Firecracker Whiskey Old Fashioned is similarly mysterious, but is once again a brown liquid in a mason jar, with the interesting effect of causing self-immolation with melee attacks. Let me know if you can think of a way that this would be beneficial in game, because I can't really think of one. Irradiated whiskey is a Fallout New Vegas beverage and is identical to normal whiskey, but will dose the player for 10 rads. It can be found at Camp Searchlight, where radiation permeates everything, and there is a 29% drop chance at Hell's Motel, where a fridge is set to load any number of irradiated foods or drinks. Lastly, the Whiskey Rose perk does not apply to irradiated whiskey, which seems like it has some interesting implications. Why would a little bit of radiation counteract the effect of this perk? Vaguely named Vodka is first seen in Fallout 3 with a deteriorated and hard to read label. It has the same effects as the other alcoholic drinks in Fallout 3, but the buffs to charisma and strength last 4 minutes, which is the longest lasting of all the options. Unlike other drinks in Fallout 3, there are not many full bottles that can be found, with a maximum of 12 in the base game. That said, 3 bottles can be found in Butch's living quarters in the vault at the beginning of the game, so it sounds like Butch's mom has a little problem. Vodka is the most valuable of all the alcoholic drinks and is used as an ingredient in the Mississippi Quantum Pie. Fallout New Vegas has vodka in the same form, but the perk Old World Gourmet can cause the player to recover some HP from consuming vodka, at a rate of 2 for 10 seconds. Increasing dehydration by 25 points, it is less common than the other options like whiskey, but can be found in all the casinos. It is also possible to craft the Sierra Madre. It is also possible to craft this with the Sierra Madre vending machines, which is an endless supply as long as there are enough chips. Vodka is used in making the Atomic Cocktail and Battle Brew, and is an option to sterilize the contaminated medical kit in the Honest Hearts quest known as Tourist Trap. Vodka goes on to be less common in Fallout 4, where it gets a new look, being called Surkov Vodka and being imported from Russia per information on the label. The effects of vodka in Fallout 4 are unique, since it is similar to Buff Out, as it instantly increases hit points by 25, while also having the strength buff and intelligence debuff. That hit point increase is very useful in survival, since health regeneration is a lot slower than normal difficulties. The Pridwin and Libertalia are the 2 places with the most bottles, but vodka can be found throughout the rest of the Commonwealth. Vodka is also found in Fallout 76 with the same effects as in Fallout 4, where the addiction chance once again is reduced to 5%. It can be crafted with water, razor grain, and glowing resin, which is a sap that is found on trees. Since vodka is unaged grain alcohol, this recipe makes sense with the glowing resin possibly being a flavoring, since vodka itself naturally does not have flavoring, and there are some spirits that are flavored with maple syrup. This is kind of a stretch, but Old World Blue's Battle Brew is probably as close to vodka as anything else, mostly because vodka is an important ingredient. Having been made by a researcher at Big Mountain named Dr. Mori, it can be found or crafted and is made with vodka, soylent green, and mutant cave fungus to give us a green liquid in a unique bottle with a rather professional looking label on it. Seriously, this thing looks like it's ready to hit the market. It's only 200 years too late. There are a whole slew of effects from Battle Brew, like increasing limb condition by 50, increasing damage resistance by 35, increasing strength by 1, and decreasing intelligence by 1. The player's vision will be given a red hue for a short amount of time, which is referred to as the red mist, and the red mist provides plus 40 to max AP and another plus 1 to strength. In hardcore mode, it will also hydrate the player and recover 10 HP for 5 seconds, which makes this drink an absolute unit. It can be crafted with a survival skill of 45 or higher, unless one goes to the so-called Strange Still in the X13 research facility, where it can be crafted no matter what your survival skill is. The effects of this are more akin to a chem than a beverage and can really help out when fighting some of those bullet spongy enemies that Big Mountain will throw at you, like those freaking robo-scorpions. Plainly labeled Scotch is shown first in Fallout 3, where it has the same effects as all the other alcoholic drinks, which doesn't make it stand out at all. Represented as a large bottle with a simple label that just says Scotch, it is a bit more common than vodka and will be given to the player by Dukov, or sold at a discount by Gob at Megaton. The bottle it is in is the same bottle as the empty, large whiskey bottles that can be found as refuse throughout the Wasteland, so that makes it nice and confusing. In Fallout New Vegas, it has the same effect as in Fallout 3, and the benefits from the Old World Gourmet perk that vodka benefits from also applies to Scotch. It is a less common beverage though, but it can be found in all the casinos. Fallout New Vegas gives us the only Scotch variant, named Jake's Juice, and is visually identical to Scotch, and also has the same exact effects. There really is no other way to distinguish this from any other Scotch, other than the name, and you would be forgiven if you overlooked this completely, as there is only one single example in the whole game. It is found in the Lucky 38 in the Presidential Suite, and even though it is super rare and only found in one place, it has the same value as a normal Scotch. Jake Juice is a reference to Jamaica ginger extract, which was a 19th century medicine that had this extract with 70 to 80% ethanol by weight, making it a great way to access alcohol, particularly during the Prohibition era when all other alcohol was restricted, but medicines like this were still legal to buy. The government made it so that the only over-the-counter available kinds of Jamaican ginger extract had to have a certain amount of ginger extract to make the ginger taste very harsh and the medicine overall less palatable, to help keep people from consuming it just for the alcohol. Some producers looked for alternate ingredients to get by these regulations and make the unpleasant ginger taste more palatable, and a man by the name of Harry Gross started to put triorthocresol phosphate into his drinks, which was used at the time as an ingredient in paint thinner. This was thought to be non-toxic, but was in fact a neurotoxin that would build up in the user's bodies and cause paralysis in the feet, legs, and hands. This condition was known as Jake paralysis, Jake walk, or Jake dance, since it affected people's mobility, and is estimated to have affected 30 to 50,000 people permanently. This is a very curious item to include, particularly in the Lucky 38, and I wonder what significance it has, if any, with Mr. House. Irradiated Scotch is the last variant and has all the same stats and appearance, merely dosing the player for 10 rads upon consumption. It is only found in a few places, one of which is Camp Searchlight, which sounds about right since that place is the most irradiated location in all of the Mojave. No form of tequila has survived from the pre-war, and only the so-called Wasteland Tequila is an option. As such, it can only be crafted by the courier and is shown as being in a whiskey bottle with the same color as whiskey as well. Introduced with the Honest Hearts add-on, it has the normal buffs and debuffs that we have come to know and love with alcoholic drinks, but tequila will benefit from the Whiskey Rose perk and also has a poison resistance effect of +5 for 1 minute. It only requires an empty whiskey bottle, water, and agave fruit, which is exactly what the tequila itself is made from. It is also nice to see extra effects other than the normal buffs and debuffs that we have come to expect with these drinks. I'm not sure what the origin of the poison resistance is, but there are some kinds of tequila that rather than having a worm at the bottom, have a scorpion, and perhaps that tradition continued, but with small rad scorpions that work to reduce the venom's effectiveness. That is really a stretch, but it's the best I could come up with. The only other variant of tequila is the, wait for it, large Wasteland Tequila, that merely requires more of the same ingredients and increases the strength buff poison resistance, and damage threshold, while also increasing the intelligence debuff. The drink uses a large whiskey bottle, and that is how they are shown in-game. So when I said that was the last of the tequila, I lied. But I lied for a good reason. The next so-called tequila is absolutely revolting, and I was considering not covering this at all in order to not offend all you high-class folks and your fragile sensibilities. Who am I kidding? If you're listening to my videos, you have zero standards. Made with water, mute fruit, crimson flux, which is a mystery fluid from irradiated plants, and tick blood, you can mix it all to make a non-fermented beverage. But once it is fermented, it apparently makes a tequila. Who knew? Considering it uses actual blood, I feel like it was a missed opportunity to have an in-game Bloody Mary, since tequila is usually made from agave rather than fruit, any sort of mystery fluid, or, you know, blood. With an alcohol addiction chance of only 5%. The only other drawback is that you risk getting a disease from consuming this beverage, which, like, duh. Have you seen the size of those ticks? Those things have to have like mega Lyme disease or something. The upside is a very strange effect where melee attacks will replenish hunger, as in by executing melee attacks, your character's hunger levels will go down somehow. I'm not even going to try and make sense of that one, but the drink is shown in-game as a shot glass, so it doesn't seem like it takes much to have this effect. The Tick Blood Tequila Margarita takes tick blood, corpse seed juice, and salt, which when brewed will have the same exact effect as the Tick Blood Tequila. We aren't done though, because the Tick Blood Tequila Sunrise is another option, which is just mute fruit juice and tick blood that are mixed and brewed, and again, this has the same exact effect as the previous beverages. So you have 3 drinks with one of the most disgusting ingredients ever, all are said to be tequilas but none are actual tequilas, and they all do the same thing. I think the Fallout 76 devs may have had a few too many Tick Blood tequilas themselves. There is no gin in the Fallout series, although that was not always the case. Fallout 76 had its uniquely named Toxic Gin that was introduced with the Steel Rain update, but was then removed in Update 29. Anyone with the consumable in-game could keep it, but the ability to craft it or learn the recipe was disabled for some reason. Taking nuclear materials, toxic water, and tar berries, the Toxic Gin had interesting effects that would increase the player's damage by 10%, as well as making enemies' damage resistance be reduced by 10% when the player attacks with melee. The drink has to be fermented to get all those benefits, and it will irradiate for 50 rads, which, considering the nuclear material ingredient, is pretty understandable. Toxic Gin and Tonic just needs blight. That's it, and will make a green liquid that will increase damage by 15%, but the ability to make this beverage was also removed. Lastly, the Toxic Gin Martini could be created with mute fruit, and mute fruit only, which was represented in-game as a martini glass, which is pretty dang fancy. This one merely lowers enemy resistance by 10, but again, this item is no longer available for crafting. Fallout New Vegas gives us a cool looking drink known as the Atomic Cocktail. It comes in a unique shaker that looks like a rocket, and has the name of the cocktail emblazoned on the side with an opalescent liquid inside. It has a unique effect upon consumption, increasing energy resistance and fire resistance for 2 minutes and dosing for 9 rads. In hardcore mode, it will increase dehydration and decrease sleep by 100, which can be super useful. With maxed out survival skill, it can provide 75 energy and fire resistance and decrease sleep by 300, which is very impressive. It consists of a Nuka-Cola Victory, vodka, and mentats, and requires a science skill of 25 to make. The cocktail is a reference to a real-world cocktail of the same name that became popular in Las Vegas when people would attend atomic test parties, which is where people would just gather, get drunk, and watch the atomic test explosions off in the distance. The recipes I found for the real atomic cocktail only have the inclusion of vodka in common with the game recipe. Usually the atomic cocktail is a mixture of several spirits and an orange wedge or other citrus fruit, and is noticeably devoid of any colas or illicit drugs. The atomic cocktail can be found in a few locations, including Klamath Bob's liquor store, the Ultralux when you have won 3,750 chips, and a few other places that makes this a rare item. The resistance to radiation and fire is also very appropriate given the name of this cocktail. Before a patch, the atomic cocktail required double the ingredients for one cocktail, and it does not cause any sort of alcoholic addiction, even though vodka is a big component of the drink. Perhaps this is the reason why it can be occasionally found on dead legionnaires, which it really shouldn't given the Legion's hard stance against chems and alcohol use. Now I wish there was a random encounter where a group of legionaries thought they were getting around the Legion's restrictions with the atomic cocktail and got a little too sloshed and got lost in the wasteland. Fallout 4 gives us the chance to make the Dirty Wastelander, which is not a reference to your mom, although if the nukes fell now, then it probably would be. Rather, it is a beverage that cannot be found anywhere, but can be crafted or bought from some aid merchants. It does the same thing all other alcoholic drinks do, but to a greater extent, increasing strength by 3, charisma by 1, and lowers intelligence by 2, with a 25% alcohol addiction chance. This is probably closest to a whiskey and coke since it was made with 2 whiskeys, 1 Nuka-Cola, and 1 mutfruit that may be used for garnishing. I kinda thought we would have seen this earlier in the Fallout series, but Fallout 76 is the first to give us the option to make and consume hard lemonade. It can be crafted after acquiring the recipe, and the recipe is quite straightforward, being simply vodka and lemonade. It only affects AP stats, increasing overall AP by 30 and AP regeneration by 10% for 10 minutes. Rather strangely, there is a 0% alcohol addiction chance. So good news everyone, this is the first child-friendly hard lemonade. Alright, so we've talked about some strange and puzzling alcoholic beverages so far, but this one has to take the cake. The Sierra Madre Martini is described in-game rather aptly as a surprisingly strong, restorative, and disgusting drink. Indeed, this drink really shouldn't even be classified as a cocktail, if it weren't simply for the fact that it has the word martini in the name. This beverage was invented by Dean Domino, using what little could be found in the Sierra Madre Villa, and will increase max hit points by 75, plus 4 to endurance, and plus 2 to strength for 4 minutes. Once the recipe is obtained from talking to Dean, we learn what exactly goes into this potent mix, requiring a tin can, 2 junk food, alright so far so good, and 1 jar of cloud residue. We end up with the martini. That is really it, junk food and cloud residue. So I'm not even sure where the liquid, let alone the alcohol to justify this inclusion in my list comes from. Even the tin can is suspect because if the player drops the item from their inventory, it is shown as a whiskey bottle with a handwritten label that bears the name of the drink, which is a sickly dark brown color. It has a high alcohol addiction chance at 15% and has a plus 30 for the UMON value, which stands for usage monitor. For those that forgot since my last chems video, the UMON value tracks how much a certain item is consumed and adds the item's UMON value to a running total. Once above a certain threshold, addiction occurs, so it doesn't matter how lucky you think you are, after a certain number of drinks you will get addicted to this stuff, which will decrease agility and charisma by 1. It can be found in a number of areas in the Sierra Madre Villa, and has a high drop chance in any of Dean's stashes, but it is not all that common of an item. The item has a few quirks, like how it can be found inside the actual casino, even though allegedly Dean has never been inside, and this item has a 0 skill requirement to make. Although the fact that this has an alcohol addiction could be a mistake, as the fact that it requires a tin can and then it is shown in a whiskey bottle may attest to, there might be interesting implications. It is interesting to think that the cloud itself, while inhaled, is toxic, but may be treated with heat or mixing with other ingredients to become non-toxic, with impressive boosting effects to the body. Additionally, I think it is a stretch to think that fermentation is happening with the junk food and cloud residue, but it is certainly possible, and may just point to the fact that one of the many chemicals within the cloud may be ethanol, which is trapped in the cloud residue and gives the martini its alcoholic content. It's hard to say for sure, but it's kind of fun to think about. Fallout 4's Far Harbor introduces the Resilient Sludge cocktail, which just sounds like it would hit the spot, doesn't it? It isn't actually alcoholic, and similar to the Sierra Madre Martini, seems like it only found itself here because of the name. It increases max HP by 75, but decreases radiation resistance, probably because a main ingredient is condensed fog. You know, the stuff that is completely choking out Far Harbor. Add some blood bug meat and Rad-X, which may be used to neutralize the radiation in the item itself, and you have yourself something that I guess you could call a drink. It is represented as a simple brown glass bottle and doesn't have any alcoholic addiction chance, nor does it have alcohol. So yeah, maybe I should have put this in a different list. Oh well. While I'm talking about things I shouldn't, let's talk about an altered form of the Resilient Sludge cocktail, the Strong Sludge cocktail. It will increase radiation by a whopping 150 rads with the effect of increasing strength, proportional to the amount of radiation your character has. It is made with condensed fog, blight, and dirty water, so at least we have a liquid now, even if there's no alcohol to be found. This can only be crafted by the player and will be part of my future video on my Child of Adam Fallout 4 build. Fallout 76 gives us a pretty faithful recipe for the White Russian, which requires vodka, coffee, and Brahmin milk, which mirrors the actual recipe for the real world, except, we use cow's milk. Give it a couple more years, and we may get a chance to embrace division, and Brahmin milk White Russians will be on the menu. It has the effect of reducing limb damage by 25% and has a low alcohol addiction at just 5%. The Fallout 76 version looks a lot less appetizing though, as it is just some gray liquid in a mason jar. Fallout 4 has a pre-war story in a terminal in the Robco Sales and Service Center that serves as the final setting for the Automatron DLC. Some bored researchers found themselves mixing grenadine, vodka, and the biogel together and daring each other to drink it, after which they all found it actually tasted pretty good. Biogel is the liquid that robo-brains and other technology that holds living brains use to keep the brain alive, whose makeup is unknown and could consist of just about anything imaginable. They jokingly came up with the name Extractor Sunrise since they were in the extraction department taking brains out of poor prisoners or dishonorably discharged servicemen. They considered sharing this new concoction with others, but decided against it since the biogel was apparently $1,000 a pint, which is pretty expensive. But given the level of inflation in the Fallout universe just before the Great War, it probably isn't as expensive as it sounds. Too bad we couldn't craft anything like this in game though. The last entry on this list is the last because it is the most unconventional method so far to take in alcohol. And no, I'm not about to talk about butt chugging. In Fallout 76, after completing the quest Holdout, an NPC named Mitch will give the player the recipe to make Firebelly that will immediately reduce hit points by 30, but will cause damage output to increase the lower the player's HP is. This sounds like a great pairing with low HP builds and is made with Aster, Bloodleaf, and vodka, but we haven't gotten to the most questionable part yet. This is not a drink. Rather, it is shown in-game as a slightly modified stim pack, simply foregoing any other colors, making it a more gray, but the method of intake is the same. Injecting the concoction of vodka and some other herbs straight into your body. I don't think I have to tell you why this is a bad idea. Intravenous, or what is more likely the case, intramuscular injection of alcohol is exceptionally dangerous and is not recommended. Even though this is how the object is shown in-game, the in-game recipe tells the user to drink the product, rather than inject it like it is assumed one would do with a stim pack. So, I'm getting mixed signals here.
And so we have come to the end of the list, but I would love to hear your thoughts on some of these. Which of these unique concoctions sounds the best? Which sounds the worst? I would have to say the Sierra Madre Martini sounds just downright awful and could only be concocted by some dude that has been stuck in a nightmare murder town choking on fumes for 2 centuries. Huge thank you to my patrons and members that support me, and a big thanks to you for making it this far. It is always humbling to see how supportive and kind many of you are, and I thank you. Embrace the glow, brothers and sisters. I sincerely hope that you have a good day, and I will see you soon.